Home ownership is a big part of the American dream. And the more home ownership there is in a community, the stronger, the more livable the community is. We know with the recent recession, the market went down, financing was difficult, and what's happening today? Where are things? Do you own a home? Would you like to own a home? Welcome to People, Places, and Politics. I'm Patty Milne, and my special guest today is Mike Erdmann. Mike is the CEO of the Home Builders Association. I've known Mike a long time. Proper introduction, Home Builders Association of Marion and Polk Counties. And I was fascinated, Mike, too, and I said, send me a little bit of bio, because although I've known you, there are lots of things I don't always know about my guests. And you did graduate from Oregon State University with a degree in political science. And with what's going on in the world of building and home construction and all the regulation and the laws that are so restrictive right now, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, that political science degree is probably exactly what you needed for your position. But you also served in the Oregon legislature for one session.
Did not serve, but was on staff, correct?
Staff.
Yeah.
I use the word serve because it was great service. And that was back, and you a while ago, and you've been at the Home Builders since 1991.
It is 24 years. Time
Wow.
goes quickly, that's for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So before we get into some of these specific issues, tell us, what is the Home Builders Association? Sure. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you important in our community?
Well, thanks. I appreciate the invite, and it's good to be here. The Home Builders Association is a trade organization that represents the residential construction industry here in Marion and Polk counties. And we've got about 700 member businesses, and our job is to make them more successful in their own businesses. And so we do that in a variety of ways. We do that representing them before various levels of government, both locally, state, and federally. But then we do things that make them more successful in terms of selling their products. So we do events and activities that allow them to connect and build business relationships within the industry. We do events that allow them to market and connect with consumers. And so you may be familiar with the two home shows we have in January and March at the fairgrounds. And then we do the tour of homes every June. And then we do other items. We do educational seminars, we do insurance products, group purchasing, anything we can that makes them more successful in their own business.
And certifications?
We do some certifications as well, absolutely.
Good, good. So, and again, I have to say the last home show, and I try to go because I'm always interested in what's new and what ideas are out there, because I love housing, decorating, and all of that, especially as it relates to my own house. And a little plug here, one of the things that your organization also does is provide referrals.
We do.
For people in the business. Who do you go to? Who am I going to get to paint my house or remodel my bathroom?
Exactly. You never know when you're calling on an area that you just don't have the contacts, and it's hard to necessarily find information. We're a great resource for folks, so they can give us a call, 503-399-1500. They can go to our website, which is homebuildersassociation.org, and we'd be happy to provide referrals to them.
Good. And I did myself get a couple of referrals that I have some projects going on right now. So wanted to be sure to mention that. And then also, you mentioned the home show in June, and so why don't you give a plug for that right now
I will do
before we
that.
forget to.
So the tour of homes coming up, it's June 20th through the 28th, and it's throughout Marion and Polk counties. We've got 28 homes that will be primarily here in Salem, but we'll be out into Dallas and Monmouth and surrounding communities, out into Staten as well. And we've got homes that range from the low 200,000s all the way up to, this year, 4 homes over $1 million.
Wow.
Some going up to 1.5, 1.6 million. So
that begs the question, is the market better?
The market's better. The market's better, but the market is not back to what a normal market would be. And so, we took obviously a mighty drop, when the recession hit back in 2007. And in the Salem area, for example, we actually dropped about 85% in terms of construction activity in about 3 years. And so it put a tremendous number of folks out of work. And of course, folks that are watching at home here on TV, they probably saw the value of their own homes drop, and so it hit everybody. And it's coming back, but at the same time, even though we're a lot busier, our folks are a lot busier, prices are recovering, we still see that activity is still probably about half of what we'd expect. And so actually did a presentation last week. We were doing some of the numbers. And in Salem, for example, based on what our population is and what we expect our population will grow at, you'd think we'd do 600, 700 homes a year. We're still only doing about half of that. So
wow.
it's getting better. Everybody can feel it. But the good news is there's still plenty of room to grow.
What does that mean then right now in our local economy? There's some improvement, but not where we'd like to see it.
Sure. Well, home building is a big driver of any local economy, not just here in Salem. And in fact, every new home that gets built produces the equivalent of about 3.3 jobs.
Wow.
And so when we think of the homes that didn't get built back in the recession, and then of course we were at maybe a somewhat more unsustainable pace, doing well over 1,000 homes a year. So when we dropped down to literally about 150, you know, that represented the loss of close to 2,500 jobs in the community. So to see that start to recover, it's a good thing for Salem. It's a good thing for the greater area.
Yeah. And then the prices are where, now you mentioned for the Tura homes, beginning in about the 200,000 level, but is the average home price in the general Salem area a little bit lower than that, or not? Or where are we?
Well, on new construction, the home prices tend to be a little higher, of course, and so I think the average new home right now is in the 250, 260,000, and of course it's going to be more expensive than existing homes that are on the market. But the average price tends to be in that 250, 260 range.
Okay, but somebody who's looking to buy a first home, and often like some of us did, you look for that fixer-upper so you can build some sweat equity. Is that still the case? Are people still able to do that and build some equity?
Absolutely, absolutely. And whether folks are buying an existing home or they're buying new, the great thing about Salem, and it's different from the Portland market, is that you still have affordable housing. And so you still have folks that can buy their first home at a young age, folks that are in their 20s, and they can get started like all of us did and buy a smaller home and then move our way up the housing ladder as we get a little older and have a little more disposable income to put available to it. So,
yeah. So what are some, I want to talk about some of the regulations and some of the, again, because of your position as the CEO and those areas, the regulations and laws that affect the prices. What's going on out there right now in the marketplace?
Well, I mean, I think that our industry may be about the most regulated industry out there, and I think the average number of inspections tends to be about 17 inspections, for example, start to finish on a home. And so there's not too many other industries where your work is inspected the whole way through the process. But, you know, it is a very regulated industry, and it starts at the very beginning in terms of land use and extends all the way through the sale of the house. So there's a lot going on. You know, some of the particular issues that we're dealing with right now and affect the land use side are on stormwater. And so we're seeing a lot in the way of new federal and state stormwater regulations. And these are being passed down as a part of the Clean Water Act from the federal government and the EPA and enforced by DEQ here in Oregon. And so it's something that the feds have thrust upon us. And larger communities such as Salem and other areas in Marion and Polk counties are dealing with this. And what we're seeing is that developers have to do a lot more in the way of stormwater controls, not just retaining the amount of water on site, but actually making sure that when it leaves the site, it's essentially as clean as it was in a pre-developed state.
And what does that involve? How do you make it as clean as it was when it came down? How does that happen?
Basically, it's filtration. And so what's going to happen is folks will see new subdivisions looking very different than they did in the past. And so instead of having your typical street and then a sidewalk and then a lawn, what you'll have is you'll have a bioswale, a fancy ditch, but that's probably being a little unfair, but a bioswale between the street and the sidewalk. And that'll have some special plants in there that catch the water, that hold the water, and filter out the various toxins that may be in it. The trouble, though, is it's expensive. And so we're seeing some of our folks that are starting to do some of the development work getting quotes back on what that's going to cost. And some of that's running $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a lot. So it makes it increasingly challenging to do affordable housing when you have to do that from the very beginning.
Yeah. What other issues? And backing up to these inspections. I thought we were going to get to where one inspector could take care of multiple inspections. Is that not happening?
Well, there are some jurisdictions, some cities that have inspectors that are cross-certified to do that. But at the same time, even though it may be one person, there's still multiple points in time during the process. So, you know, a framing inspection is going to be very different from final inspections. So,
True. So how many trips does an inspector have to take? There's the very, very preliminary and...
Yeah, there are very preliminary inspections coming out, gosh, as soon as the house is getting ready for foundation to be poured to make sure it's been staked out properly, and foundation inspections, and it just goes from there. So,
and what do those inspections cost the potential homeowner?
Sure,
or the builder before the point of sale?
Yeah, and so that's part of the building permit, of course, that the builder pays for. And so it's going to vary depending on the size of the home, but folks are going to pay in that $2,000 a home, you know, neighborhood for a building permit.
Wow.
Yeah. But that doesn't include that's just the building permit. That's just to get the approval from the city. What that doesn't include is what are called system development charges, and those are the impact fees that folks pay when they want to build a home or a commercial building. And in Salem, for example, those are running another $14,000 approximately. Some cities like Silverton, they're considerably higher than that. So, you know, before you've even turned a shovel of dirt, you're into that permit and the associated costs, you know, north of $20,000 in many cases.
And so what system development charges have been around for a long time, but what's the latest? I know there's some new attacks.
Well, yeah, system development charges have been around since 1989, and I think as an industry we have a bit of a love-hate relationship with those fees because, like anybody, we hate paying fees, but at the same time we recognize that they provide the infrastructure that we need to connect to. And so when we talk about streets and water lines and sewer lines and all the rest, so we know they have to be there. The concern is that that in most local governments, those fees tend to far outpace the price of inflation, and so it makes it difficult to keep up with. And so many local governments have held off on doing those kind of fee increases during the recession. But what we're finding now is as we come out of it, they're coming back and saying, gosh, we need to look at those fees, we need to increase them. So it's a challenge.
Increase them. Oh, gosh. When you and I spoke on the phone recently to prepare for this program, you talked about inclusionary zoning, and this just hit me. Oh my gosh. Talk about it. Explain to the viewers what this is all about.
Yeah, inclusionary zoning is one of the most onerous proposals that I've ever seen, and I've been working in the industry for almost 25 years. And inclusionary zoning is a bill that has passed the House in the Oregon legislature. It's now in the Senate, and it would allow local government the ability as a part of the development approval process to tell the builder or the developer that a certain percentage of homes in that development must be sold to somebody of lower income. And so essentially it requires that the builder subsidize low-income buyers out of the pockets of those that are paying for the other homes. I've never experienced or seen any other example of local government setting a price.
Wow.
And you think about it, we don't tell car dealers that they have to sell a certain percentage of their cars to those that otherwise couldn't afford new cars. We don't tell Safeway or other shopping centers or supermarkets, that is, that they have to sell groceries at a loss to those that otherwise can't afford them. But here we are potentially telling builders that they have to sell a certain percentage of their product at a loss to subsidize folks that otherwise couldn't afford that new home.
How would this happen? Walk us through a scenario of a developer developing a 50-lot subdivision, and just hypothetically, because you were talking about average prices and new homes, just to make it simple, $200,000 homes is the target. So how would this inclusionary?
How would that work? Right?
How does that work?
So in the bill that passed the House, it would allow local government to mandate up to 30% of the homes be sold to those of certain income classifications, and it doesn't really specify what those income levels are. And frankly, there'll be a big difference. Are they talking about targeting those that are working class families, that we've got two income earners that both have jobs that may not pay extraordinarily high wages, maybe they're 80 to 120% of median income, or are we talking about those that are truly lower income that may be working, a retail job or $15 to $20 an hour? And it's not specific as to what that is. And the fear is, if we're trying to target those in those lower price ranges, frankly, the subsidy that would be involved in pricing it at a point that they could afford it, frankly, it kills the project. Because if you would have to subsidize 18 of those 50 homes and get a home that may cost you, $240,000, and yet you can only sell it for $150,000, you're subsidizing tens of thousands of dollars. And my fear is that they think that builders are making money hand over fist and they can just take something out of their profit. And if you look at the typical profit margin on a new home, it's in that 7 to 11% price range, or 7 to 11% range. So it's not as much as folks think.
There's not much leeway for things to go wrong or prices out of the builders, the developers' costs go up, and she has no control over it. And then you're dealing with, oh my goodness.
Exactly. I mean, it's terribly concerning to us, and we're paying a lot of attention to what happens once it moves over to the Senate, and if it moves out of the process. So,
well, what's really behind this? I mean, why? It just doesn't, as you mentioned, it makes absolutely no sense. It really just destroys the new housing market.
Yep. There's a lot of factors and a lot of folks that are behind it, coming at it from different directions. There's no doubt, and we don't deny, there's an absolute problem with housing affordability. There are too many folks in our community and other communities that can't afford to buy a home, and so certainly that's part of the issue. You have folks up in Portland, especially, where housing prices really have escalated far beyond what we've seen here, and so that disparity between what folks at the more moderate income means can afford and what it actually costs to buy a home, that's a pretty big gap. And so folks are concerned about that. There are other folks that look at the social justice part of it to make sure that folks can live in the same part of town that they may be working in. And we don't deny that there's a housing affordability problem, but I think our belief is that this is a community issue. And so as a community and as communities, we have to work together to solve that problem. You can't just thrust it into the lap of home builders and say, you take care of it, it's not our responsibility.
Yeah.
And the other concern, of course, is that much of the reason that housing has gotten so expensive is government regulation. And government regulation at all levels of the process. And I'm not saying that regulation is wrong, because we understand that regulation has a role. But for government to, on one hand, drive up the price of housing through urban growth boundary restrictions and various issues like stormwater that I talked about, and then turn around and say, gosh, housing is not affordable to too many folks. You have to subsidize those that can't afford it. It's stunning. The good news is that I think some folks are recognizing the problem with inclusionary zoning, and in fact, the Oregonian just editorialized, I believe on Sunday, against inclusionary zoning. And so the state's largest newspaper saw it and realized that it's a wrong-headed process. It's the wrong thing to do. So we're hopeful that smarter heads will prevail.
Oh gosh, what are some of the other challenges that the home builders are facing?
Sure.
If those aren't enough.
Well, there's still a problem with buyers and their ability to qualify for financing. It's gotten a lot better than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. But the banks are still very gun shy, understandably so, perhaps, after what they went through back in the late 2000s. But it's still a challenge for folks to get financed. That's a hurdle for a lot of people. And we're seeing that lot prices haven't recovered, at least in Salem, to that level that has justified a lot of developers taking the risk to actually develop subdivisions. And so right now we have some development activity here in Salem from developers that got their projects approved back in the mid-2000s, but they only have 10 years. And that's under city and state code. They only have 10 years to actually develop and build out that subdivision.
So they're looking at having to do it now.
They are, and so some of those projects that got mothballed are actually starting to get resurrected. But there's not too many brand new projects, and part of that is because lot prices haven't risen to the point where it actually makes sense that you can actually make a profit. There's just too much risk there, so folks are holding back.
And then home builders, of course, they're small businesses typically, and like other small businesses, the issue of minimum wage. So what are you folks looking at there?
Yeah, the minimum wage is just one of those issues that's coming out of the legislature. We talked about inclusionary zoning, but there's a host of of what we would perceive to be fairly anti-business bills in the legislature. And the minimum wage bill is of tremendous concern to us as well. And there's been a lot of talk about a possible $15 minimum wage,
Yes.
whether that comes out of the legislature, whether that ends up being a referral to the voters, whether interest groups take that to the voters in terms of a ballot measure. But what it does to us is it really drives up the cost of producing the home. And so, we have plenty of folks that are earning well more than minimum wage, because the great thing about the construction industry, it provides family wage jobs in many cases. But of course, you also have folks on the job site, the laborers, folks that are maybe just getting started in the trades that aren't earning $15 an hour by any means. And so if the requirement goes to $15 an hour, then of course you're paying a lot more than what you were paying now. But of course, it's that wage inflation that pushes everybody else up. Because if you've got somebody that has skills and some years of experience, and maybe they're currently earning $15 or $16 an hour, but the laborer who comes in without those skills and all of a sudden is getting paid $15 an hour.
So you have the non-skilled who has a right to be there and learn and increase his or her wages, but the skilled person, and they can't be at the same level, which pushes all the other levels.
It does. And what it means is that in many cases you'll find that we won't be building the homes that otherwise we could. Because as much as we'd love to price the homes based on the costs that go into it, we're held back by the appraisal process. And that's been one of the other tremendous challenges the last few years, is because the way the home sales and financing process works is when you sell a home, the buyer's lender is going to hire an appraiser and see how does the sales price of that home compare to similar homes that have sold in the past. And of course, if all of a sudden your costs go up, of course that's not reflected in those homes that you built a year ago or a year and a half ago. And so the appraisals won't reflect that. And so those projects won't take place.
Wow, that creates another dilemma that is really out of the hands of the builder and the developer. What other things are going on in your world
oh gosh,
that people might want to know about?
Yeah, so there's certainly more bills that are coming out of the legislature that we're very, very concerned about, and we could talk for a while about it. One of the ones is a flexible scheduling requirement, and what that would do would be to mandate to employers that they have to allow flexible schedules for their employees. And so when you think about folks, and we understand the desire of folks to do that, but when you have folks that may have a dentist appointment or something to go to during the workday and to schedule around that. And I know that I think the folks that have proposed those bills may be targeting larger employers. They may be going after the fast food, the retail industry and the like. And I think maybe those groups can work around it a little easier. But the challenge is, especially for small business on a construction site, it gets really difficult. If you've got a 3-person framing crew where everybody is dependent on the other to get the work done, and one of them has to be gone for the afternoon to attend to something, then the whole crew shuts down. And that makes it very, very difficult
and you have
for
weather,
small
and
employers.
You have deadlines, and oh my goodness.
Very difficult. So certainly can understand the intention behind it, but the practicality of it makes it really, really difficult for small construction employers on a job site to deal with it. And that's just the beginning. We've got other requirements, sick leave requirements, and we've seen that happen in cities like Eugene and Portland, and so there's an effort to perhaps make a statewide requirement. That's a real challenge for our employers as well, because as I said, they're small business, and the construction industry in many cases tends to have a workforce that moves around. And so when you have 3 or 4 employees and they're with you for a few months and then they're off, perhaps you run out of work and so they get laid off for a few weeks. It makes it really difficult for those small employers to keep track of the hours that somebody's working and apply to sick leave accordingly. So it's very difficult and very, very cumbersome.
Oh, this is not sounding good for the building industry, Home Builders Association. So you have lots of conversations with your builders about these issues, I presume.
We do.
What would you like to see happen? And I know I can't ask you to speak for all your members, but what kind of, is there a consensus of really what the legislators ought to be looking at? I don't want to put you on the spot. If there's anything you can share, that would be great. If not, so be it.
Sure. I mean, certainly from our perspective, from a small business perspective, we'd love to see the legislature focusing on job creation. And so how do we create an economic climate in which folks can succeed, they can pursue and succeed in that small business, and as a result, they're profitable and they pay the taxes. And those taxes go back and they're put into the state coffers, and that goes to a host of social services and other purposes, education and the like. So I think that the focus that we'd like to see is a focus back on growing the economy.
Any suggestions coming from your industry or what would help grow the economy?
Well, gosh, there's lots of different ways they could be doing that, but certainly when we look at the regulatory environment, trying to make it easier for folks to succeed versus complying with the regulations that they're putting in place. It's difficult for a small business owner to grow their business when they're complying with increasing level of regulations. There's a lot of other things going on, though, that we think are important
go
for
ahead.
future growth.
We have a couple of minutes left,
a little bit of time,
please do get into that, kind of a look to the future.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at Salem and we look at where the growth is going to take place here in the future. A lot of that is going to be in West Salem. Because we're largely built up against the urban growth boundary on the east side of town. Kaiser is largely built out. They have some small pockets available. There's some land in South Salem, but really when you look at where is the available land, it's going to be in West Salem. And so for us, making sure that the proper infrastructure is in place to get us water and sewer and transportation is key. And there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate about the river crossing, about the need for a third bridge. And for our industry, we think it's very important. And I live in West Salem, and so I see what the traffic is.
firsthand.
I do, and I try and avoid the bridge when I can to avoid that. But when we look at the number of folks that will be moving to not only West Salem, but our Polk County communities, to Monmouth, to Dallas, to Independence, there's going to be considerably more traffic and more vehicles on those bridges. And so we have to prepare for it because it's such a long process and it takes so long to go through the state and the federal regulatory environment to figure out the funding process for that bridge. It's many, many years involved, more than a decade. And so looking ahead, we need that bridge. We need that for...
and you need it now.
We do, and especially for the future.
I say now because the process to actually get it under construction and then finalized is very, very long. So I wanted to insert that.
Very much so, very much so.
What else? What else?
Gosh, well, we talked about the bridge. We talked a little bit about what's going on with the economy. We did take a look to see what is taking place in terms of construction. I said that here in Salem we're perhaps half of what we'd expect the normal level of construction to be. I think it's picking up perhaps as we go a little farther north. I think Silverton and Woodburn are a little more active right now, but at the same time they're running out of land.
I say we. I live in Woodburn, and definitely that's a problem in the urban growth boundary challenge.
Woodburn will be out of finished lots by the end of the year. And so that's a real challenge for Woodburn. And so when you restrict the housing supply, when we can't bring more supply onto the market, simple supply and demand economics, prices are going to go up. So that's
a sure thing.
It is, and it's not a good thing necessarily for especially folks that haven't yet bought a house, that haven't got equity that they can ride as the market goes up.
So we're running out of time, so I want to thank you again, Mike, for being here on behalf of the Home Builders Association. And real quick, in the last second, your contact information if anyone has any questions or follow-up of what you've shared.
Absolutely. So they can reach us at 503-399-1500, or they can also reach our website, which is homebuildersassociation.org.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.